There is an important saying of the ancient Greeks, which was inscribed above the entrance to the Temple of Apollo at the Sacred Mysteries of Delphi. This saying consists of two simple words: know thyself. An expanded version of this maxim may also be found in the golden verses of Pythagoras, where it states, know thyself, and thou shalt know the universe and God. It is these simple words which may provide a key to understanding the intricate workings of one's mind in the course of one's life, and which may lead ultimately to a place of self-mastery and spiritual realization. For if one cannot recognize within oneself those unseen forces which drive the greater universe, as well as our smaller human personality and human behavior, then one will be susceptible to the shadowy impulses of lower instinct, fear, and limitation. Throughout the centuries, the mystical and philosophical mysteries have provided mythic or metaphoric models which will help to identify these forces which lie within. Some of the most significant of these traditions are listed before you. The progression of these Western mysteries has been referred to as the Hermetic tradition, or sometimes as the perennial wisdom. It is this philosophical and mystical tradition which in due course became a central focus in my own life. But it took many often confused and painful years before I could come into this rich spiritual inheritance. It is the underlying premise of these traditions that the smaller material universe is the reflection of a larger, unchanging universal order. This notion is embodied in the well-known phrase, as above, so below. This greater order or seed pattern of creation lies at the root of all things, expressed in the many constructs of nature, human consciousness, and human culture. This founding matrix has been referred to as the Logos, from the ancient Greek meaning reason, word, or order. Logos was central to the philosophies of Heraclitus, Pythagoras, and Plato. The two images presented here are of Plato and Pythagoras, as depicted in a fresco by the Renaissance artist Raphael, entitled The School of Athens. It is these two Greek philosophers who transmitted key elements of the Egyptian, Orphic, and Delphic mysteries to later ages, just as the Florentine Platonic school of Marsilio Ficino and Raphael helped to pass on the Platonic wisdom to subsequent centuries. The triangle of 10 dots, known as the tetractys, expresses in visual form Pythagoras' conception of the Logos and his fourfold model of creation. For me, it is a fivefold model, which I term the grand pentatic matrix, that lies at the root of universal creation. It is this fivefold principle of the Logos which has become the central locus of my life, for it drives my perception of the world around me and provides the foundation for all my art and creativity. Before turning to my own personal experiences in the context of these philosophical and mystical traditions, I wish to discuss one important logoic model, as expressed through the Greek deities of Dionysus and Apollo, Dionysus being the god of ecstasy and fertility, Apollo being the god of illumination and beautiful forms. Most simply, this divine pair may be understood as representing the first and second polar principles of energy and matter, of instinct and reason, of impulse and order. These principles have here been placed before you in a table of correspondences. I introduce this dyadic model because it may serve as a valuable aid in navigating our life's journey. It has served as a significant tool for understanding the course of my own life, as it has threaded its way through the hills and valleys of light and darkness. The artwork on the left provides a visual depiction of these Dionysian and Apollonian forces. This is a drawing by the Golden Age illustrator, Billy Pagani, and provides an interpretation of the text of Wagner's opera Parsifal. The character of Parsifal is here depicted in his luminous Apollonian guise, his shield emblazoned with the GRAIL of the sun. He battles with the dragon of lower instinct, aggression, and fear. These darker human characteristics are represented by the figure of Klingsor in Wagner's opera. Interestingly, in the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche's defense of Wagner's music, Nietzsche provided another analogy which can help us understand the nature of these contrasting qualities of the dyad. The philosopher equated the intangible, energetic Dionysian force with music, and the Apollonian principle with the tangible, formative aspects of the visual arts of painting and sculpture. On the right, we find another example of the Dionysian and Apollonian relationship. Here we see an image of Plato, and to his left, Aristotle, as depicted by Raphael. In this case, the idealist Plato represents the Dionysian principle, with its conceptual roots in the unseen, the archetypal, and the unmanifest. For this reason, he holds his right hand upward, pointing to the heavens along the vertical vector of spirit, and holds upright in his left hand his metaphysical dialogue, the Timaeus. Representing the Apollonian principle is Aristotle, with his emphasis on material analysis, from his detailed classifications of nature to his study of the formal rules of human behavior. Accordingly, Aristotle holds horizontally in his left hand his book on ethics, and also gestures with his right hand on the same horizontal material or earthly plane. The polar division is further borne out in the painting's color symbolism, as Plato is enrobed in the red of generative fiery spirits, and Aristotle in the cool receptive blue of sea or sky. Another example of this Dionysian Apollonian model can be found in the drawing at the bottom of the page. In this design, we find two large A letters, one in shadow and one in light, symbolizing these two polar principles. This emblematic headpiece was repeatedly found in the published works of the Elizabethan authors Francis Bacon, Spencer, and Shakespeare, all of whom have been associated with the Hermetic Rosicrucian movement. The Apollonian and Dionysian archetypes may also be found in the myths of various solar heroes, such as when Perseus battles Cetus, the sea serpent, or Apollo conquers Pythia, the Delphic snake, or St. George defeats the dragon, or Jesus resists the temptations of the devil in the wilderness. It is this dialectical interplay which we as humans must repeatedly face within ourselves, ever balancing light and dark, instinct and reason, selfish desire and altruistic sacrifice, childlike spontaneity or measured control. This balancing act of opposing forces constitutes a crucial component in the quest of the soul, as described by the various mystery traditions. In Pogani's drawing, the female figure that is wrapped in the coils of the dragon represents the human soul, that eternal pristine core of our being, which is ultimately freed from the limits of bodily experience, be it through the release of death or through the transformations of mystical experience. In this sense, does Perseus fulfill the initiatory quest of the sacred mysteries through his rescue of Andromeda, who represents our greater inner soul. The hero, in defeating the sea serpent Cetus, has conquered the lower parts of his personality and the limitations of the original reptilian core of our human brain, using reason and empathy to free the soul from its physical limits, rising on the wings of higher genius and luminous self-knowing to a world of pure wisdom and ceaseless beauty. The world of the child is marked by pure impulse and innocence. by creative fervor and vivid imagination. In this respect, it is the Dionysian force which dominates in the early portions of our life. In our early years, the world is much more magical and alive, as the child is able to imbue simple toys with life and personality. For the child more readily believes in the unseen powers of spirit and magic. Such innocent, imaginative qualities are embodied in the mythic character of Parsifal, as well as in the archetypal tarot card of the Fool. Both refer to an unconditioned state of pure being, closer to first creation, as signified by the number 0, which rules the Fool card. Some of my earliest and happiest memories are of creating art. I recall times at preschool when I was fully immersed in the process of fashioning drawings. In a sense, it was like being a magician, able to access a wondrous invisible world. Later, in elementary school, my imagination was captured by magical tales, as I was particularly captivated by Greek and Roman mythology. I remember checking out from the library that rather lengthy tome entitled Bullfinch's Mythology and reading it for hours. Perseus was my favorite Greek hero, and Athena and Hermes were my favorite gods. The most distinct memory from my junior high school art class is of a pencil drawing I made of Perseus. Needless to say, the greater archetypal significance of these gods in my life would only be understood many years later, and then in the context of the Hermetic mystical tradition. Of course, in conjunction with all these positive Dionysian aspects of pure impulse and imagination in one's life, the child has few discerning rational controls which will protect him or her from the world's dangers. Thus, for the sake of personal safety, it is necessary for our parents and society to impose certain constraints. Unfortunately, these Apollonian constructs of family and society can in time overwhelm or extinguish some of the free, purely joyful, and creative potentialities found in childhood. This was a dynamic that was to become a part of my own life, as my original impulsive joy became lost to the pressures of social conformity and other external concerns. This led to the abyss of depression and those dark nights of the soul which would haunt me during my teenage and college years. This being a malaise that unfortunately affects all too many young minds, particularly those of an artistic, mystical, or iconoclastic bent. As a child, I was very much attracted to the romance and chivalric ideals of knighthood. I decorated my bedroom with knightly mementos, and even painted my own heraldic crest to hang on the walls. Later, I came to understand this knightly attraction in the context of the mystical initiatory traditions and the idealistic notions of love as expressed by Dante and the troubadours. Similarly, I now understand the page squire knight hierarchy as it relates to the threefold initiatory stages, which could be found in the preparation, purification, perfection model of Pythagoreanism, or the blackening, whitening, reddening phases of philosophical alchemy. Even as a child, unknowingly, I longed to touch the Holy Grail, to rise to its light, to live in the realm of pure abundance and pure creativity. For the crust of the Grail symbolizes that desire for the return to greater unity, to the world of innocence, illumination, and divine wisdom. Being an introverted child and something of a nerdy egghead, I was addicted to reading. I remember often hiding under the covers of my bed or in my closet with a flashlight, so that after bedtime I could sneak in a few extra moments in the wonderland of books. Yet despite all the innocent joys of my life, there was a darker shadow that haunted my childhood, and it came in the form of nightmares and feverish dreams. It only happened when I got very sick with a high fever, my bouts of sleepwalking. Such somnambulant states seemed like a form of possession, yet possession not by some entity outside of myself, but of some dark, unidentified thing within me. After these sleepwalking episodes, my parents told me what had occurred. In this dream state, I was not responsive to others and only vaguely aware of things around me. Despite this, during this trance, I would command others, telling them that they must not move or that they must move to a specific spot, or else something terrible would happen. Then upon waking, I'd remember little of these episodes, little but the dreaded sense of fear. In addition to these occasional incidents, I also had recurrent nightmares, even when in perfect health. Again, these dreams were not recalled upon waking, in large part because I was afraid to remember them. I simply tried to shut them out of my consciousness. But at some point before the age of 11 or 12, I came to a realization. Somehow I came to understand that the only way to dispel these nightmares was to fully face them, and to then remember what I had seen. Thus, one by one, I faced my fears and solved the mystery of these shadowy dreams. In the first dream, I found myself in the center of a racetrack with cars speeding around me. Their speed and intensity were frightening, but the strange thing was that the cars somehow seemed to be driving straight and circular at the same time. Furthermore, I viewed all this from a cave at the center of the racetrack. After I was able to remember this first dream, it was forever dispelled from my life. The second dream was that of the fevered terror of possession that I described earlier. After remembering this second dream, it too was forever dispelled. In the third dream, I was held captive in my bathroom, tied up and sitting on a toilet. My tormentor was a shadowy figure who wore a mask, but whose eyes burned through the mask with a fiery red glow. Sometimes a black raven would sit upon the figure's shoulder. Eventually, during one of these nightmares, I gained the strength and courage to free myself from my constraints and reached up and tore the mask from my tormentor's face. At that point, the mask's presence and my dark dream vanished, never to return again. Many years later, I came to realize that these three dreams followed the unseen pattern of the Logos, with one dream to embody each of the first three universal principles. I now understand the racing cars as symbolizing those elusive energies and thoughts within us that I could neither control nor understand. I see the central cavern as representing our physical selves, or our perceptual limits that keep us from seeing the true greater forces that lie behind all phenomenon. A symbolic equivalent to this dream may be found in Plato's famous parable of the cave. The second dream refers to the material or physical aspect of things, and the need to have certain parts of our lives put in their proper place. The third dream refers to our minds being captive to lower biological or mental functions, which is to say, the preservational serpentine force. Accordingly, my captor took on the qualities of an antichrist, that is, the fiery serpentine Satan. By removing his mask, I was able to expose the hidden truth that lies behind such shadowy things. Now, all of these dreams were a product of that instinctual Dionysian part of my subconscious. What was necessary to save myself from their threat was to fully face the fear, to direct the rational Apollonian part of my consciousness to understand the unknown. This great unformed receptacle of the unconscious is known by alchemists as materia prima, or first matter. It is this primal sea of subconsciousness that is depicted as the black circle in the alchemical image on the left. The black raven often represents the deeper, unseen operations of our psyche. And in the alchemical process, ravens can symbolize different stages in human development, from putrefaction and decay towards purification and understanding. On the smaller human level, this dark unknown holds the secrets to our hidden natures and desires. As Carl Jung expressed the issue, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. On the universal level, there is another kind of unknowable, formless state, which has been said to provide the indefinable or paradoxical source of all. And it is this incomprehensible God essence, this transcendent first matter, that created for me another source of childhood fear. I remember that sometimes at night, as I lay on my bed trying to get to sleep, I would become burdened by the most terrifying thought. It was like this. Now, if God made all of us and everything else, then who made God? I mean, he had to come from somewhere, even if it was like the old Greek gods where a bigger, better God made a smaller God, and so on and so on. Someone still had to make the first God. How can we even be here at all? How can there be nothing and then everything? I would get terribly scared at night when I lay in bed and thought about it all. How can I even exist? It makes no sense. It is all impossible. I can't really exist at all. During these dark times, I was afraid that I might just die or disappear at any moment. So I just pulled the covers over my head, hoping I wouldn't suddenly disappear from the face of the earth. During these episodes, I was unknowingly confronting a fundamental yet troubling principle. Nihilo ex nihilo. Nothing comes from nothing. This is a conundrum that has been addressed by mystics, philosophers, and theologians throughout the centuries. Such a paradoxical universal source has been posited as the ultimate God by Christian mystics such as Pseudo Dionysius and Meister Eckhart in their negative theology. Just as it may be found in the first principle of Kabbalistic creation, termed the Ain, the no thing, or found in the Hindu Nirguna, Brahman, or God without attributes. It is this ultimate transcendent source that is depicted in my painting before you. This deep dark mystery is something that simple reason, or the light of Apollo, cannot provide a satisfying answer for. Yet it is something the mystic can experience in those ineffable cosmic states beyond words or measure. We now move away from the lands of childhood innocence to the world of adolescence. The trials of adolescence can be trying for so many young women and men, as the individual has to come to terms with one's emerging personality, the educational demands of school, and the pressures of fitting in with new social structures. I know that I experienced great insecurity and doubt at this time, feeling a sense of not fitting in, being somehow different, in addition to having low self-esteem. And with the beginning of puberty came all the hormonal and biological changes as well. Due to these changes, the fiery force of Dionysus arose within, in terms of arising anger and frustration, as well as the physical eruptions of acne. I looked into the mirror, and all I saw was a person whose appearance was marred by sores, eyeglasses, and braces, while all my unique positive qualities that lay within went unappreciated. This can be a brutal combination for the young woman or man to experience, particularly as self-worth was so often based on outer or superficial concerns. And it is striking how one's early self-image and insecurities can be carried as a burden for years to come. For me, all these things contributed to an ongoing sense of depression. And though I never spoke of this to anyone, this darkness was to haunt me for the next 10 years of my life. Before you is a famous engraving by the Renaissance artist Albrecht Dürer. There's analysis of the complex symbolism of this engraving in my book, Mysteries of the Christos. Dürer's looming figure represents melancholy, which was considered in ancient through Renaissance times as one of the four humors or temperaments, representing the major human personality types. These four types reflect the fourfold logos and were identified as the choleric, the melancholic, the sanguine, and the phlegmatic. It is the qualities of a melancholic type that most match my own inner disposition. Melancholics are often deep thinkers and feelers. They tend to be introverted, introspective, empathetic, and reserved. But what is important to realize is that these very melancholic qualities in a troubled or undeveloped person can become great blessings for one who truly understands themselves or seeks to go deep within. The Renaissance philosopher Marsilio Ficino, whose work influenced the symbolism in Durer's engraving, described the melancholic temperament as that of the philosopher. And it was the true philosopher, for Ficino and for Plato, who possessed the greatest capacity to rise to the heights of mystical experience and divine realization. For it is the qualities of empathy, introversion, and introspection that are needed by the mystic to achieve their inner states of transformation and divine identification. Not surprisingly, many of the greatest mystics have possessed these characteristics and suffered periodically from depression, physical illness, and dark nights of the soul. For example, Hildegard of Bingen, St. Teresa of Avila, and St. John of the Cross. Unfortunately, little did I know at the time that the very qualities which were such a burden to me then would in time become great assets in my own philosophical and mystical quest. One of the great joys and sources of solace for me at this time came in the form of music. For just as the myth of Orpheus suggests, the beauty of music may soothe the wild beast in one's soul, and for one hypnotic moment raise us above the troubles and cares of the world. Both my parents had a love for music, my father enjoying the rhythms of jazz, while my mother preferred the harmonies of classical music. At the age of about 9, I started taking piano lessons. I can't say that I lasted very long, just a few months in fact, and thus I didn't really learn much. For my mother had a strict rule: no practice, no lessons. And I didn't like practice. But then at the age of 11 or 12, I started sitting down at the piano, and without sheet music or instruction, I simply began playing things that I heard on the radio. Soon my father noticed, and though I could barely read music, I learned to read chord charts as jazz musicians did, and began improvising, or played accompaniment as my father sang the popular classics. By 12 or 13, I had begun composing my own music. Though working mostly within the jazz idiom, I also absorbed qualities of classical music. I remember in elementary school when I was selected for something called resource class that was composed of but a few specially gifted students. I was struck by a piano piece of Rachmaninoff that was played by one of the girls. I also have strong memories of Rachmaninoff's variations on a theme of Paganini that my mother often played on the stereo. As for jazz artists, my father loved the pianist Errol Garner and Oscar Peterson. They became favorites of mine as well. Perhaps the most amazing of these African American pianists was Art Tatum, who had been completely blind since birth. It should come as no surprise that these two forms of music also fit into the Dionysian Apollonian model. Jazz music is largely based on spontaneous improvisation and instinctual response, and thus reflective of the Dionysian impulse. Classical music has a more formal and complex Apollonian structure. And while the greatest composers, such as Bach, Handel, and Beethoven, were known to be inspired improvisers, in performance, classical music adheres to precise musical scores.